Hello, this is John Majori with MajoriOnBowie.com. You're at the MajoriOnBowie.com YouTube channel, where I post a new interview every week that has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog, www.MajoriOnBowie.com, where I post something new every single day that almost always has something to do with David Bowie. So for today's interview, I'm very excited to have a very special guest, Kev Gahan, distinguished artist and illustrator. Kevin is a London-based illustrator and mural artist with a distinctive flair for comedy, satire, and incredible detail. His work has been described as freewheeling and subversive, with projects ranging from editorial pieces for the Washington Post to collaborations with artists such as the Pogues. He is perhaps best known for illustrating Where's Bowie, which we're going to be talking about today, and Where's Prince, books and puzzles, which showcases talent for creating intricate and imaginative worlds. Kev is also the creative force behind Rebel Pencil, an independent contemporary art and print store that offers a tongue-in-cheek response to the live, laugh, love culture with designs that push back against the mundane. Describing his own career path, Kev likes to quote his mother, who said he achieved nothing since winning a coloring competition at the age of 10, which reminds me of a Bowie line from Ashes to Ashes. I never done good things. I never done bad things. I never did anything under the blue, which none of us believed either. There are many things we could talk about today. So today we're going to talk about Where's Prince? No, I'm just kidding. We're going to talk about Where's Bowie? This is a Bowie blog. So Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the intro. That made me sound so much cooler than I actually am. Thank you.
Well, I think you're cool. That's right. Imagine you're on the show. So I'm going to pull up some of your art for the book. But before we get into that, what's the premise? What's the premise of Where's Bowie? It's reminiscent of another type of book where readers are expected to locate a figure within a complex picture. What's the premise?
Yeah, so that was, and they were books that I actually was fascinated as a kid. Was the Where's Wally? I think in America it's Where's Waldo?
Waldo, yeah.
Yeah, in the UK it was Wally. And yeah, I had those books as a kid. Absolutely loved them. Just the detail, and you just stare at them for days and just see new things every time you open up a page. So when I got commissioned to do the Where's Bowie, I was already quite well attuned to, the detail and what it takes to kind of bring a page to life.
Yeah, I was looking at Rebel Pencil, and much of your art is reminiscent of this style. And so, how is it? Like you didn't just decide, you didn't get the commission and decide to just approach the style of art from scratch. How did it come about that you started doing this?
So I've been working as a freelance illustrator since I graduated in 2008. And I've been working mainly for like magazines and newspapers, publications on that, like illustrating certain articles. And I was then represented by the lovely Katie at the Illustration Room. She's an illustration agency based in Brisbane, Australia. And I'd been working alongside her for a long time. And it had been really good. I had been like traveling the world and still been able to work, as soon as a commission would come in, I would settle down, find a place to work and do the work that way. And this job came through Smith Street Publishing. And Katie had worked with them on numerous publications. I was living abroad at the time in Warsaw, and the first project that came through was an A to Z of the Beatles. And I think you already have the A to Z of David Bowie.
Yeah.
But they were doing a Beatles one. So it was me, and I think maybe two other artists that were put forward for it. We did samples, and I didn't get that job, which was kind of gutted because that would have been a really great project to work on. And then not long after, when I moved back to the UK, there was news of a Where's Bowie book. And again, it was me and I think two other artists that were put up for it, because we all had kind of similar styles, in certain with different styles, but similar ways of being able to create this book. And originally, it went to Rob Cohen, and he's done a lot of amazing books like those. Where's Bowie one? He did like, I think there's Where's Wookie. There's a few, and his style is perfect for it, and he can get the detail really nice. But sadly, he had to drop that commission because there was some illness in my family, so he passed it over to me. Yeah, so then I got accepted for it, which was a dream job. Yeah, one of those jobs where you're like, wow. One is going to be a book, which is always exciting to physically see it,
right.
But then to work on the subject matter of David Bowie in that kind of subject matter, great.
Yeah, I mean, I asked this out of order. So you had familiarity with Bowie beforehand. The book doesn't just have hidden pictures of Bowie within it, but these figures from his the larger Bowie verse. How much of that did you have to research, or how much of that did you know?
So this, like, I think everything I've ever done, like, the universe has an amazing way of giving things to you, whether it's like certain ideas or certain projects. Now, I have always been a huge music fan. Art, even though I'm an artist, less so. I couldn't really talk about art for much. Music, I could talk about all day. And that's, from the moment I wake up in the morning to when I go to sleep at night, even if I'm having a shower, I have to listen to music. And I've always got to find new artists, and whether it's, from the past or, present day, I've always got to be finding music. Otherwise I get really depressed. I've just got to, no matter what genre it is, just keep exploring. Bowie was an interesting one because as much as I should have loved him and appreciated him, I didn't. And I think that's mainly because I came to him, I guess, through Ziggy era.
Yeah.
And it was great, it was like, it's good, but it didn't really speak to me. I didn't feel connected to it. And, the song would come on, I'd be like, yeah, it's a great song, but, it didn't feel like it's mine. My older sister had Heathen.
Yes.
And again, I think at that period of my time, I was very much into The Clash, a lot more heavy guitar music. But I remember looking at the artwork, and the artwork was amazing. And it's got those religious imagery inside, and it's got paint splatters on it, or it's been something like Marilyn Manson would have had. But this was David Bowie. And then, again, I don't think that album really clicked. But then, 2018, I had decided to go traveling, and I was traveling around the Eastern Bloc. So I'd gone through Russia, gone through Ukraine, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And then I suddenly got sick of traveling, and I got to Warsaw, and I just stopped. I thought, no, I want a pub I can call my local. I want a cafe that's my local. And I rented this a flat in the district of Praga in Warsaw. And Praga is the only area in Warsaw that wasn't flattened during World War II. So, and the Red Army had stopped there. So all those buildings are the original buildings, and there's still bullet holes in the walls and stuff like that. Now, I don't know what came first, whether the album Low came first, or whether it was the stories of David Bowie and Iggy Pop living in West Berlin. But for me, being in Praga was my West Berlin experience. It was my kind of time, like I was semi away from the world. It felt very kind of cut off. It was a very creative area because it was just a very poor area. It used to be an extremely dangerous area from what the locals were telling me down the pubs. They used to have to go in groups of 5 people just to go and buy a pack of cigarettes because they were getting robbed. But when I was there, it was still very edgy, very gritty, but the rent was so cheap, and there was like an amazing artistic scene around there. So I remember looking and getting really interested in David Bowie's travels when he lived in West Berlin with Iggy Pop, and his travels into the Soviet Union. I remember listening to Low, and I can't remember if Low came first and then I delved into David Bowie in West Berlin, or whether that came and then Low. But that Low album, as soon as I put it on, I was just like, I get it. I get it. And that album just seems so important to me. And it was the soundtrack of my time there. So it was Low and the Station to Station that was just on repeat.
Yeah.
You know, anything else outside of that, I didn't really care. At the moment, that's where I'm at. And I guess with especially artists like David Bowie and people with like even the Beatles and Rolling Stones, because their career is such a big span, you can't just go in and delve straight through. You have to, certain albums will speak to you at certain points of your life. Right. So for me, Low was definitely that, and Station to Station. And then hearing about the time David Bowie went to Warsaw, and then there's the track Warsaw on Low. And I think that the story goes like he was literally there just for a day. And obviously this is communist Poland at the time. And there's like a folk song or something in the song Warsaw that he heard passing by like a record store or something like that. But just all these little stories like that, and to be there and to be like next to the Stalinistic building of culture and science, I don't know, it became this amazing bubble. And yeah, that's when I truly got into David Bowie.
Yeah.
And the job, luckily, came not long after. So I was like so into the Berlin era of Bowie, and then obviously Station to Station and his time in California, and then I went back and we did Ziggy era. So yeah, by that time I'd kind of really infiltrated the Bowie camp.
Yeah. Well, anybody that looks at the book not anybody who knows about Bowie that looks at the book will recognize that you've developed an in-depth knowledge of him and his places and his figures, and we're going to look at that in just a moment. But before we actually see it, I want to ask a question about your style of art. The purpose, just in the book itself, the purpose is for somebody like me to recognize the figures amidst a crowd. And I've talked to other artists who have depicted Bowie, and to capture his essence or to capture the essence of people, sometimes they've relied on nearly photographic detail, light, perspective, and the figures that you draw are two-dimensional. There's no cross-hatching. They have dots for eyes, yet not only are they recognizable, but that's the whole point, is to recognize them. And before we look at actual examples, just in the abstract, how does that work? Like, what's your approach to make that work? Because I can, like, if I tried that, I would fail miserably.
So that was the hardest part, because I'm not a caricature artist.
Yeah.
And the second thing to make it even harder is you've got to draw it quite small scale. So you have to really go down to the minimum features. If you did a large portrait, you can get all the features in. And that was so hard, because even though I'm drawing on large scale, it then gets reduced. So the more details you add, by the time you reduce it so it's finally book size, it's going to look like he's going to look like a 90-year-old man, because it's going to be all the wrinkles are going to be too compressed. So that was the hardest part. And I'm glad you're saying they are recognizable. What I would also do to really help would be either put them in a certain stance that would make them recognizable, but most of the time it's the clothing.
Yeah.
The clothing would, stand out, which was also difficult because although they had permission to do the book, certain copyright still belongs to certain things. So like a photograph, if you mimic that photograph of, say, Bowie in that certain stance or wearing exactly the same clothing, then you're impinging on that copyright. So you have to still change things enough so it's not the exact copy, which makes it even harder. So by the time you've done it, they were the hardest parts, was to make people look recognizable, but in such a simplistic form. That was the tough part more than anything.
One other observation I made before we actually get into the pictures is another thing that you do is you often have the figures holding or near an object that reminds people where we might have seen this figure before. And just we're not going to see this example, but a really obscure one was Geeling Ching, who's the girl from the China Girl video. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, how do I know that's her? Right. And part of it is she's holding a bowl of noodles that in the video, there's that bowl of noodles, right? So there's that little visual cue that connects the face with the setting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to thank my previous self because I'm struggling to remember a lot of this. And it was only like preparing for this interview, I was just like, oh, I need to, look back at this because it's only been like 6 years, but wow, it's like I really struggled to remember it. And it was quite fascinating because when you see like actors, but they one of the biggest films, but they've never watched it. They acted in the film, but they've never watched it, or musicians have never listened to their famous album. And I've always struggled to look at the book afterwards, and I'll kind of quickly glimpse through it, but like, no. And it was only prior to this that I got the images up and I was looking through it and I was laughing. It was like I was seeing them for the first time. And like, I have no memory of doing a lot of it because it was such a short time scale for it. Like the deadline was so short and it was just like, okay, go. So I'm looking at things and it's like I'm seeing them for the first time or I'm a complete stranger to it. And some of it I'm just like, oh, that's really clever. Like, how did you think of doing that? And, it's kind of, it's really bizarre.
Well, let's take a look. Okay, so this is me reading the book. That's what the book looks like. But you gave me this, and let me ask you, what are we looking at here? What is this?
So this is the amazing in-depth brief I would be given. So it's a good thing that I was a fan and very enthusiastic of Bowie. And also, but I guess more than anything, I was a music fan. So the other elements to include, I was already fans of them. About 4 years prior to this, I suddenly went into such a big Kraftwerk indulgence. Obviously, Lou Reed and Velvet Underground, Iggy Pop especially, like from the early days of growing up, I had a lot of Stooges albums and Iggy Pop's solo albums. But saying that, actually, again, everything seems to come together. I had never really done The Idiot. And again, this was in the same era. So when I got into Low, I had also got into Iggy Pop's The Idiot. And again, it just really sums up that time, especially in Berlin. So that was all more, creative elements I could add to it.
Yeah. And anybody watching this should look at it very carefully because you're given the challenge of putting in a picture depictions of people that are both well-known, like Iggy Pop, but also not necessarily well-known, like Coco Schwab. Even people familiar with her name don't necessarily know what she looks like, right? So she was Bowie's personal assistant for most of his entire career, but she wasn't an out front public figure so much. And some of these other people or places are really people that real Bowie fans are going to recognize, but not necessarily the casual fan. And so I would imagine that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But
it works really well, I guess, as a book because then it works on numerous layers. I know a lot of my friends bought the book for their kids.
Yeah,
it was their way of kind of getting their children into David Bowie.
yeah.
So on one level, they can just look at it and find certain bits humorous and learn a bit about Bowie. And then on the other end of the spectrum is you can be if you're really into Bowie, then there's so much more to find within it. And I used to use a lot of lyrics and stuff, like little bits from the lyrics I would hide in there. So it's really layered. Even some of them now, I'll be like, oh God, that's related to that song or something like that. There's so much to see within the images.
Yeah. So this is Bowie in Berlin, and we're going to look at the process of coming up with the pages for the book on Bowie in Berlin. So what are we looking at here?
So this was to get it off the ground. Every time they would send that brief over, I would just have to kind of do a quick thumbnail to say this is going to be the layout. And luckily, I think every time it went through without any problem. The Berlin one was hard because they wanted the studios in there and the nightclub in there. So it was kind of hard to get the perspective and kind of make it work, essentially. And so it's also recognizable that it's Berlin. So this was the thumbnail I produced. So we could see inside the club, but then we could also see outside into the street. And then obviously there's clues to it's West Berlin. There's Checkpoint Charlie there, Reichstag right in the background. So so before anything's been drawn, the layout is the first thing that to get approved.
Yeah. So I'm just going to note for the anybody watching this, I'm suggest looking at the far right, you see the interior of the club, and it looks very sketchy, obviously, right now. And there's other little clues, like Kev mentioned, the Checkpoint Charlie, and I think that's the Brandenburg Gate in the back.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. So you're putting those in to orient the viewer to recognize the setting. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is near completion. So we're going to look at this in more detail. But from that very sketchy sketch, you developed this very extremely detailed image, which is in the book. It stretches out over 2 pages, and the game is to find Bowie. But as you're playing the game and you're looking at the picture, you're finding all these other figures as well that speak to Bowie's time in Berlin. So we're going to look at some more details from this image. But do you want to say anything about this in general?
So obviously you saw the thumbnail, so that's like the layout of what it's going to be produced. That was the only thing I would have to submit. From then, I would just start drawing. And the deadlines were so short because Rob Cohen, the original artist, he sat on it for a while and then realized he couldn't do it. So that left even shorter deadline. And I was thinking, I had about 2 days maybe to draw it all up. And then maybe 2 days to color it for each page, which is insane when you think about it. But it also is the way I would normally work. Like, for me to have to kind of like send them each individual bit, like, okay, this is one joke I want to use in it. This is one scene I want to use in it. I think that would have kind of killed the process and would have been really tiresome and boring to wait to hear back from the publishers. So luckily for them, they just let me do what I want. I just had full creative freedom. And the way I would start would literally, I would draw one person, and then suddenly someone might be interacting with that person or interacting with someone else, and the narrative would just create itself. So like someone might be eating an ice cream and the next person next to them is throwing their ice cream at someone. That ice cream has hit that person. There's people laughing at that person. Then there's something else. Like, it would just kind of like a domino effect. It would just create itself. And so it would all come straight from my mind as soon as I started drawing. There was no, okay, what can I do here? What can I do here? It was just, right, let's go.
Yeah. So you've got broad discretion as to what you're putting in the picture, but you're on a very tight time frame. Did you get to this point with anything and the client rejected it?
I think so. Like, once I had drawn it out. So in this stage, I would pencil. I think I drew everything in pencil first.
Yeah.
Then I would ink it. So I would go over in an ink pen. And then I would, the laborious task of rubbing out all the pencil, which used to take forever. Once that was done, I would then send it to the publisher. So they would have a black and white version. And I think they were all accepted. I don't think, I put in an email beforehand saying, look, what is the target audience? Because I have quite a dark sense of humor. And also with Bowie, Bowie wasn't just a top of a pops pinup guy. There was a lot of dark in his life and a lot of substance abuse and other things. So I was just like, where's the line? Can I reference certain things? I think there's the Bowie one, there's Christiane F, the child junkie.
Yeah.
She's even in this. So I put that wasn't even in the extras to put in. But so yeah, if you were like a Bowie fan, there's even more in there than initially set out.
Can we just stop there? Because I wasn't going to ask you about her, but unless you correct me, she's the bottom right-hand corner.
That's right.
And, yeah. We were talking in the abstract about how do we know that's her, and what an obscure figure, right?
Yeah.
But I think the hint as you were describing before, is in the clothing.
Just a big F on the t-shirt.
Big F on the t-shirt, right?
And I think, let me see. I think there might be like some needles nearby as well. Just
yes, yeah. Oh, I didn't even
confirm.
Yeah. So the other, before I'm going to move off this and get into some details in just a moment. But the other thing I want to point out is worked within this picture are the titles of many of Bowie's songs from Low and Heroes.
Yeah.
And some
And
lyrics.
I think some from the Lodger as well.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, this was like, and I really enjoyed doing that because it was just like, how can I incorporate more? And just the billboards, I thought was such a kind of cool idea. The Sound and Vision, which looks like it's opticians.
Yes. Yeah.
Billboard. I really like that. My favorite is actually the man in the hot dog outfit handing out flyers to a hot dog restaurant, and it says a new career in a new town. I like that one.
which is an instrumental song, right? But this is like you've got a whole story in that one little image. Hilarious. So let's look at some details. So there, you mentioned Lodger, right? So this is right in the center is the sandwich board man. Lodger needed happy today. So what's that?
So yeah, that was just like another little like hint. Obviously, Lodger was inspired during his time there. So it's just like little hints to albums or songs. So yeah, I just thought that would be kind of good. Like Lodger needed apply today. He's trying to find someone to move in.
Yeah. So in the middle, all the way on the top, looking out the window, is that a hidden figure?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that Brian Eno?
It is.
Yeah.
And so, again, thankfully, he always had amazing haircuts. So that was a helping point for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So so this is even more close up. The same image a little bit to the left. And a part of the reason I'm showing this is I just wanted to show the figures with as much clarity as possible. But is there anything you want to say about this?
Yeah, that pen there was just so people can see the scale, because obviously I had to draw it larger in scale. Oh God, I'm only seeing things as well. And there's the electric blue paint cans. I've only just noticed this myself. Yeah. Oh wow, I'm a genius.
Yeah. blue,
wow.
electric blue.
I really didn't see that then. I was really impressed. I enjoyed doing the KGB Spies and Monsters and the guys, the classic looking through a newspaper. Because obviously this is West Berlin. So there was always that threat, and who's amongst them, and what the Soviet Union thought about this rock star now living in West Berlin, I have no idea. But yeah, I wanted to put that kind of edge to it. And then obviously the obese West is the best t-shirt wearing guy.
Yeah.
And all the fast food he's eating, he's followed by pigeons. Yeah.
Yeah. Just the electric blue. What I thought was so clever about that, because I'll tell you this, I didn't pick up on that until I saw this picture. Like I didn't pick up on the detail actually.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah. But you're reminding us the context of where the phrase was used. Blue, blue, electric blue, that's the color of my room where I shall live. Well, he looks like he's going to paint a room, right?
Yeah.
So he's a painter. It's not
he's a painter and decorator, yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's like you managed to tell a story with that little figure.
And I wonder if electric blue is actually a paint color. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. I could visualize what I think it means.
Yeah.
Right. So another detail here, again, I mentioned that there were titles from different songs, and much like the Sound and Vision done as a billboard for an optometrist, you have "Be My Wife" as an advertisement for a jewelry store.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a close up of the Brian Eno, where you managed to also get more titles in Art Decade, V2 Schneider, Cut Off is The Secret Life of Arabia.
Oh yeah.
And that's
there he is.
There he is, right? So, and that, again, a little tiny detail that I didn't notice until I was looking at this is to his left is a person with the Lodger album.
Yeah, I've only just seen that as well. Yeah. Here's one that I was always aware of. The top right, there's a ghost. Was you aware that there was a ghost in every image?
No, I did not pick up on that. Yeah. Wow.
That was again, that just kind of came during it. But that was to represent his brother that he lost.
Yeah, wow.
And obviously his brother was always, on his mind at every era, every part of his life. So in every page, there's, his brother is represented as a ghost in it.
Yeah, wow. I did not pick up on that. Wow.
That was really kind of subtle. That was just me kind of drawing. I thought, oh, I'm going to add that.
Yeah. So I have one thing I want to point out here, or one question I want to ask, but anything you want to say about this detail here?
That's me. I drew myself in it.
Yeah.
And that was when I first went to Berlin. I was smoking at the time. I don't smoke anymore. But that was the era of me when I first went to Berlin and was just like amazed by the city and the history and the creativity of it. So yeah, I drew myself in it.
Yeah. And the hint, I mean, again, there's a hint, which is the initials, KG.
Yep.
So if anybody's not picking up on this, it's the figure on the bottom right.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I really like this. There's two kids playing war. There's two tanks. One of the tanks is cut off at the moment. The one's the Soviets and then one's the West. And I just love the two kids storming at each other with these toy tanks.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out is if you think back a few minutes ago when we were looking at the very rough sketch, the rough sketch indicated your intention of showing the interior of the club, which is much more evident in the near final version here. So that you had signaled your intent. Who are the four on the steps?
That's Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
And again, like when I drew it, I'm like, is that going to be enough for people to realize it's Kraftwerk? But thankfully, it's the color that plays a part on that one because they're red outfits and their slick black hair.
Yeah.
I think, then it suddenly becomes to life and it's a lot more recognizable. But it's all that fear because when you're just drawing it in black and white, you're like, I know it's going to look better once I give it color, but obviously you've got to send the black and white to the publishers. Are they going to come back going, no, it doesn't look like them? But luckily, I think pretty much they all went through. And then in the coloring stage, that gives me that extra bit of help to really kind of distinguish who they are.
Yeah, and I think the next slide shows the entire picture in color, but just for me, another clue that they were somebody I'm supposed to recognize is they're grouping together, right? They're unusually close together, so it mentally that signals, okay, these are people, right, that I'm supposed to recognize.
Yeah, and they were the most animated of people, were they? So that's why I drew them all kind of hands by the sides, next to each other. Yeah.
So another detail, Iggy was here, Iggy Pop was with them in Berlin, but this is the final product with the color and, just what we were just talking about. And the middle of the right, you see Kraftwerk and you see some other figures in the bar. I think Lou Reed is there.
Yep.
You see, we mentioned Christiane F. I recognize at least one other figure in the bar. Do you want to say who that is?
Right at the top?
Yes.
Oh, so there's two. So there's obviously Bowie.
Yeah.
And then there's the restaurant owner.
So I thought I was looking at Romy Haag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought.
In the top right, with their hair.
Yeah. Right. So this is the final product. And so you mentioned, so that went from the conceptual sketch to this final product in a couple of days?
Yes.
Yeah.
But what was the hardest part was because I was drawing an A0 size, I didn't have a scanner that big to scan it. So I took it to the local place I get stuff printed and I would get them to scan it. They didn't have a scanner big enough, but they would have to scan it into 4 parts. Then they would have to bring those 4 parts back together and realign them. So I was losing a day, maybe 2 days waiting for them to come back, which would give me, even less time. So that was such a stressful part. Yeah. So, and then once I got it back, I would just have to color. It was such a fast turnaround. But the coloring in was kind of fun because your brain is now relaxing from having to draw all these characters and make it work and add like a narrative to it and make it interesting. So the coloring part was quite therapeutic. But then you would often, I'd often go back and change things. So it'd be like, there's too much red in this corner. There's too much green over there. That green is conflicting with that person's t-shirt. I have to change that. And then I wanted to use just like a limited palette, because the more colors, the more mucky it would look, and it would just look, So I was making a palette throughout the book of certain greens I would use, certain reds. So it would still kind of look visually quite, pleasing and not too muddy. So yeah, that was kind of and again, I was having to learn all this as I was doing it, because there was no time to kind of really play about.
Well, yeah, I could imagine it would be, well, I can imagine that it would be easy to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And then you're in trouble with that time frame. There's one last point that I want to make about this before we move on, which is the case with all of the pictures, is that there's multiple Bowies, right? Bowies in different,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to move on. So I was looking for this in the book and I couldn't find it, but this is obviously still Berlin. What is the story here?
So this was the initial sketch for me to realize if I can do it or not, and also for the publishers to see in a rough, how the style is going to look. So this was, technically, it would have been a small section of the larger image I was going to draw it. So it was for me to kind of work out, are the line works going to work? Once I reduce it down, is it still going to look visually, is it still going to be quite bold enough to be able to see the details? So it was really kind of like working out if it's going to work, because heaven forbid you draw a massive detailed image and then once you reduce it, you lose all the detail. That would have been a nightmare. So this was like a little tester.
Yeah.
And again, there was just like little bits of humor in it, bits of references to certain things. Here's an interesting thing. I think it was maybe after I'd finished the book or halfway through doing the book, I looked into Martin Hanford, who did the original Where's Waldo books. And I was just like, how did he do it? Because, again, he did it all in pen and ink. And like, did he draw it large? Did he draw it small? And researching him, I was amazed. One, I found out, he was doing it exactly the same way I was doing it. He drew it large, and then the publishers would reduce it in size. But what I loved was I found out that he was a huge Clash fan. So he was listening to the Clash all the way through it. And like growing up with that books I was always obsessed with, and then obviously I'm a huge Clash fan. Suddenly I was just like, I love when little things like that come together. And like my soundtrack of drawing this was, there was a lot of Bowie being played, but then there was also a lot of Clash being played as well. So it's just like, I love that kind of connection.
Well, you answered a question that I was intending to ask, which was what were you listening to while you were making the pictures?
And I think there must have been Bowie, obviously, and that would help, because like I'd be listening to Bowie and then a certain lyric would come in and I'd be like, wow, I'll incorporate that. And it would come in that way. So literally a lot of references to Bowie might have been added because right then, that second, I heard that lyric. So it suddenly just got drawn in.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think, I don't think I would have just done Bowie, because there was a lot of time spent doing it. And I know on your previous interviews with people, when they were doing portraits of Bowie, they would listen to Bowie as well. And I think that's my initial thing would be, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to listen to Bowie. But then I feel like you need to add more to it as well. I think it would be quite restrictive if I just listened to Bowie. I think it would, I don't know, you need all that influence, I guess. And, there was like the Velvet Underground and obviously Lou Reed in Berlin. So that kind of gets added to it. So I think there was a lot being played. Yeah.
So the last thing I'll mention about this is that you have, we saw some of these figures before in the final product, and it seemed like here to me that you were testing out some ideas. Like, for instance, in the bottom right, you have a Bowie holding the electric blue paint, right?
Oh, I can't see that on here. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but then you changed it to make it more generic figure, which to me, I might be overthinking this, but I thought the more generic figure really told the story that he's a painter as opposed
Yeah.
to David Bowie just holding 2 buckets of paint.
And I thought it'd be too easy to have Bowie just holding it. I think, you know, your eyes would go to it too quick. So to be a painter and decorator, it was more of a like little subtle hint, and more like a little fun play on words, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So most of these figures reappear in slight variations in the final product.
What was hard actually was like, obviously this is West Berlin,
Right.
and I was just like, you with each page, I would also have to kind of look at clothing people were wearing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, you couldn't just put everyone in like modern day tracksuits and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah, and again, to a short deadline, it was just like, right, I need to put some kind of clothing from that era in. So yeah, there was a lot that really went into it, I must admit.
Well, it's, you know, that how much of a story does the headgear tell? The hat,
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're gonna look at a couple more. So this was you know, a space setting, which, you know, some of this appeared on the cover and some of this appeared in one of the inlay images. And I'm just showing this is a further development of that concept, but I'm assuming that's your hand.
Yep.
To give people a sense of the size of the page that you're working on. Do you want to say anything about this?
There's an interesting part to this, which I remember at the time suddenly opened up a new way of thinking. And that's because during this period was actually quite a difficult time in my life. I had just left Warsaw back to my hometown, and like on the verge of going a bit insane with the solitude. And moving back to my hometown, I had just lost 2 of my friends of around the same age. They both suddenly died of cancer. So I had that in the background of my life at the time. And then it was also heartbroken. I was quite heartbroken about a girl I was seeing, and then it didn't work out. And I was very kind of torn up about that. So there's all this woes and all this kind of, there's depression, there's a lot of anxiety going on in my life. And I can remember doing all this, and I suddenly realized every song we've ever looked at, every painting we looked at, we never really realized what the artist or the author was going through at the time.
Right.
And it's so interesting to suddenly, like, you know, you look at maybe a real famous pop song, and the song might be really happy. And like, I'm maybe thinking like maybe of the Beach Boys at the time or something like that, but, you know, real kind of happy song. But what was going on in their life was like turmoil, or, you know, they weren't in the best of places. So I was so fascinated into doing this. And like this image, I remember almost having a breakdown, because at the coloring in stage, I needed to make space on my computer. So when I was coloring in, I would save it in different stages. So it'd be like Bowie in space 1, then I would color more. Bowie in space 2, then I would color more. So if something ever happened, I could go back to it. But because I was running out of space, I deleted a lot of the previous files. So I was like, okay, I've done 12 files now. I'll keep 11 and 12 and delete the rest. But somewhere along the line, I had deleted my most recent one. So I had lost about 12 hours of coloring in. And I was like, oh, I'm going to break down. The deadline's so close. I've still got so much to do, and I've lost 12 hours of coloring in. And coloring in was also, you know, getting it right. So I've got the perfect greens here, I've got the reds over there. And I panicked, and I took my laptop down to my friend, who was he was an IT expert, but he was also working in a bar. And I took it down to him, and I remember sitting in that bar, and he was trying to recover the files I had deleted. And all my friends were in this bar. It was a bank holiday. Everybody was getting drunk. And I'm like, I can't get drunk. I would love to see my friends right now, but I can't, because I've got to finish this. If I have a drink, I'm dead to everybody. So my friend was trying to recover it. And the process ended up it took longer to recover the files than it was if I just started to coloring it in again.
Yeah.
And like when I look back at this image now, I can just remember exactly where I was, that time, that place, the anxiety, the stress. And like when people look at it now, like, oh, that's a cool image. But for me, it was such a kind of chaotic, horrible part. I can look back at it now and I can laugh, but at the time, oh God, I was in such a bad way. So yeah, what I want to say to this is like, yeah, it's from that era. I now look at everything and like paintings and be like, there's more to it than painting. You know, what was the artist going through? Was he in a happy place? Was he in turmoil? Was he in a deep depression? And it certainly kind of adds more to songs and paintings now. I think once you realize that, there's an outside influence to it all.
Yeah. It's just hard to know. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't look at this and think, oh, the artist must have been going through a tough time, right?
I
It's
was literally, yeah,
yeah,
I was fully a stereotypical tortured artist at this
yeah.
point, definitely.
Wow.
Starving as well.
So that's the final image with all the coloring done.
Yeah.
The
And I
recovered.
must have
Yeah.
colored half of that and then lost it all. Oh God, yeah. The pain. The butterflies in my stomach now thinking about it.
Wow, I'm sorry to bring back those memories.
I have to
So
go into some counseling here.
so we could spend time. We're not going to, but we could spend time like we did in the on the Berlin picture, looking at some of the details here. But with having had that experience, um, the only thing I'd want to point out. I mean, there's so much I'd want to point out, but the only thing I want to point out is there is a curious figure with a red and white striped shirt in this picture, except
Oh,
that he has 3 heads. So this
I'm
is
so glad you mentioned that because that's the first thing that popped out to me. And then obviously talking about where's Waldo, where's
yeah,
Wally, I kind of wanted to, tip my hat to the creator, and because I grew up on those books, so that was me kind of like acknowledging it. But obviously, just to draw where's Wally might bring in some kind of lawsuits.
right.
I don't think it would, but how can I acknowledge where's Wally without replicating him exactly? And I was like, okay, this is in space. He's going to be a Where's Wally mutant alien kind of character.
Yeah, that's well, I noticed it. So here's another. So this is we're going to land on the colored version, but this is the uncolored version of this Bowie. It's titled Bowie in the Studio in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and it depicts uh, the recording of different albums. There's little hints as to which albums, and that's the colored version. And I have one particular question I want to ask, but before I do, is there anything you want to say about this?
This one, I remember reading the reviews on Amazon, and the reviews were amazing. It was so positive, and it was like really nice to see people really enjoying it and interacting with it. But there was a few lines where people were saying they loved the book, but it wasn't really appropriate for their child.
Yeah.
And the book, as far as I was know, the book was never meant to be a children's book. It was meant to
Yeah.
be targeted at adults. So there's a few references in here. Obviously, what's going to happen in a studio setting. So there is a reference to cocaine in one of the rooms. There's a couple of lines on there. And again, it all went through, it all got accepted. But looking back, I was like, oh God, I can't believe I actually did that. But there's a couple making out in a cupboard.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's what a few parents were like, they had to put stickers over that part. But, it's rock and roll, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the image on the left, the second row down on the left.
Yeah.
You say they're making out. I think they seem like they advance a little beyond the making out stage, but I leave it to you. So I let me ask about this. I mentioned before at the beginning that you managed to make these recognizable figures with minimal detail. Yet again, it's like the whole point is to find them and recognize them for who they're depicting. And in this, near the middle on the second row, if you see a figure with a pinkish, fluffy shirt and long blonde hair, it looks like he's wearing makeup and he's holding a device. How is it that I know that that's Brian Eno? It's a second appearance here, but how is it that I know that's him? What did you do to make that recognizable?
Obviously, the clobber, the glam clobber he's wearing, the clothes, and his hair as well. But obviously, yeah, just the outfits he used to wear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, those stand out, but you have like, in case you don't get it, he's also holding the synthesizer.
That's right. Yeah. Which is, was it he created, or he had a lot of input in the creation of it?
Of the device itself?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
I
But
can't
I did.
remember now. I remember reading about it. Whether he, well, because he obviously kind of pioneered it, but I
Yeah.
can't remember if he had a lot of influence or, yeah, in the making of it. That I can't remember.
Well, I'll tell you the other thing that I thought is that I'm pretty sure that you have him holding a particular type of synthesizer, and I just don't remember the name of it. But
Yeah, same. That's
yeah,
gone from me now, but yeah, there was a particular one
yeah,
which was used, I think, in a lot of his recordings. There's so much still to see in here. I love, yeah. So there's David Bowie's brother again as a ghost in the bottom left room in the
yeah. Bottom
background.
left. Wow.
Yeah,
I really, that is a detail I did not pick up on until you just mentioned it. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's really subtle, and I think it was kind of like, and again, where my head was, I just lost two friends as well, so it's kind of like the mourning of someone or of people. So you know, it was just, and I think it was such a kind of shadow over. You know, it was always there. So even in, you know, creative environments, I think, you know, his thoughts would always refer back to his brother, I guess.
Yeah. Right. Terry Burns. Okay, so this is I live in New York State. I live in Albany, New York, which is 2.5 hours north of New York City, and this looks like Washington Square Park.
Mm-hmm.
And David Bowie lived in New York the last 20 years of his life. But that's not why I'm showing this picture. We see the beginning of the coloring. If you look at the bottom left and maybe the bottom row, you see the beginning of the figures being colored. And you've been talking about the coloring of these pictures throughout, but do you want to say a little bit more about how do you actually do it? Are you doing it on a computer? Do you use some other instrument first? How do you color this?
So everything is hand drawn, first in pencil. Then once I'm happy with that layout, I will ink it. So I draw it over in a pen. And then, yeah, as I said before, I rub all the pencil out. Then I scan it. Once it's scanned, I then used to I used to double layer it up so the lines would be a bit more thicker and prominent. Then I would put it into Adobe Illustrator, and that would sharpen the lines up. I think I did that actually. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I put it into Illustrator just to kind of fill in the lines, make everything kind of a bit more smoother. Then, oh, and that was the most important thing was, so if I put it into Adobe Illustrator, I would create it into a vector because once I reduced it, I didn't want the lines to go blurry or damaged. So I would put it in Adobe Illustrator to make it into a vector. Then I would, which would kind of, it saves the line work and stuff. It kind of creates a file where it protects the lines. And I would reduce it down to the page it was going to be printed in. Then I would transfer that into Adobe Photoshop. And then I would play around, make sure everything's in the right place. If I needed to double the lines up again, I would. And then I would start the process of coloring in. And that used to be the most nerve-wracking part because I'm quite OCD. So if, you know, I'd be like, are those lines sharp enough? Is that okay? Does that look right? And certain bits would just drive me mad. And I would just have to be like, okay, that's as close as I can get it. You know when musicians go into a studio and it's their second or third album and they've been in a studio now for a couple of times and now they're like, okay, they're trying to create a masterpiece and they spend like 11 months just choosing the right snare drum or something like that. You know, they get too stuck in it. So
Yeah.
I was getting to a point on that, I was like, right, it's got to be really perfect. And it was just driving me mad. So I would always have to kind of step back and be like, yeah, this is going to be fine. This works. And then the process of coloring would go in. And the coloring was kind of tough because I had like different shades for skin. So I would have to kind of work that out and, you know, get a mixture of ethnicities in there. And yeah, it was a lot of kind of juggling about getting the coloring in.
Yeah, and here's what the final product looks like, which the color obviously adds, a completely different dimension. Okay, so we're gonna just a very quick look again, a conceptual sketch, and then the near final, without the colors. Another near final image, and these are in the book. So if you want to see what this looks like finished, get the book. If you're at this point in the interview and you're not interested in getting the book, then I really, call me. I'd like to talk to you. So, here's another final image. And let me just sort of pause here. And now, of course, my eye immediately goes to the ghost.
Oh, I
But,
can't see it. Where? Oh, yeah,
sort
there
of
it
in
is.
the
Yeah,
middle.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So just, I wanted to just pause on this one and ask one or two not necessarily obvious Bowie references that are in here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm asking you, like,
Okay,
so you could,
so let's
there's a
have a
few
look.
that are obvious, but I think there's a few that are not.
So there's obviously a lot of the fashion designers are in here. Fashion was kind of a hard one to do because it was, but references, wow, is it going to take me some time? I can tell you actually, you said earlier, what was anything that was rejected and had to get changed?
Yeah.
Originally, the statue on the far left, there's a guy with, he's popped a bottle of champagne and it's spraying the guy in the face.
Yes.
Originally, that was a guy. This is so bad. I'm surprised I got away with half of this stuff. There was a guy behind the statue and he was actually urinating. So it looked like the statue was urinating, but it was actually a guy behind the statue. And that came back from the publisher saying, yeah, we might not be able to get away with that. So I then changed it to a guy popping some champagne.
Yeah.
But references to Bowie in this, okay, let me have a look. I think it's mainly just a lot of fashion designers in here.
Yeah. There's this one struck me as having maybe the most images of Bowie, from some of his different phases wearing very recognizable clothing.
Mm-hmm.
I might be wrong, but I think he's in this picture more than most of the other ones.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So at this point, this has been terrific, Kev. At this point, people watching this are going to want to know where they could get. They already have the book. They want to get a piece of your art, and this is not from the book at all, even though it has a Bowie reference. Why don't you tell us, where can somebody get a piece of your art?
So obviously I was working as a freelance illustrator. So that's Kev Gahan illustration. And that's for like newspapers, magazines, and then obviously creating this book, which was also made into a jigsaw puzzle just before lockdown. So that was really fun to see.
Yeah.
But I was traveling around South Africa, and that's when the pandemic hit. And I was meant to be there for 3 months. I was finishing Ware's print over there, and I got stuck there for 11 months. So I was just like, right, I've got all these designs, I might try and sell them, as like artworks and as prints. So I set up a company called Rebel Pencil, and I just did an online store, just usual with, Shopify kind of store. And I must have had about 20 designs. And it was so amazing. Like I had an Instagram, and then people kind of connected to it, and I started to sell them. I was like, oh wow, there's something to this. And then once I got out of the lockdown there and I was allowed to fly back to England, I moved back down to London, and I started doing a market stall in Shoreditch, selling these prints. And that was something I had not experienced, was the actual connection with people with the artwork. Because obviously, as a freelance illustrator, you send the design off to the client. I don't see people's reactions reading the Bowie book firsthand. I get sent really nice emails and stuff, but to actually see people interact with it, I don't get to see. So selling my artwork down in Shoreditch, suddenly seeing people enjoying it and going, "Oh my god, yes, this," or finding something funny, and it's just like really nice connection. So yeah, that's how Rebel Pencils began. and obviously, you know, things I like, I make prints of. So the Berlin trilogy was, you know, for me, how I got into Bowie, and for me to be like, that's it. I'm a Bowie fan for life now.
Yeah.
So I wanted to create. I love cassettes, and I wanted to put the cassettes of the Berlin trilogy. So this is one of the prints that I sell. And yeah, I just, anything I'm kind of really into music wise, I kind of want to make some kind of artwork. So anything that, you know, like that, I sell through Rebel Pencil, and the website's rebelpencil.com.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the blog post. So
amazing.
Kev Gahan, thank you. This has been tremendous. I had fun with the book, and I really enjoyed you walking us through how it was made and some of the details. And you know, it's a kind of thing. It's a short book in terms of pages, but you could spend hours with it, and it's a lot of fun. So
thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm trying to remember it all. Was like a daunting task to begin with, but now it's been so fun to revisit it, and like you said, like certain things, and it's like, wow, I can't remember doing that, but that's really cool.
Yeah, well, thank you. Please let's stay in touch. This has been tremendous, and I look forward to the next one.
100%. Thank you so much, John. Love it.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.